What if I told you that the fortress you are about to learn about was the last real bastion of the Crusaders in the East, which became a symbol of titanic resistance, an impregnable stronghold, an outpost of Christianity, standing in the way of the expansion of the greatest empire of its time, the Ottoman Empire? In 1522, the tiny island of Rhodes was hit by the full force of the Sultan, who had assembled an army the world had not seen in decades. The story of this siege is not just a military conflict, it is a dramatic duel between faith and power, where 7,000 defenders, Knights of the Order of St. John and local residents, faced an armada of more than 100,000 Ottomans. Watch the video to the end to find out how the greatest ruler of the Ottoman Empire, Suleiman the Magnificent, was forced to retreat from his principles and offer the knights terms that he had never offered to anyone before. Are you ready to learn the truth about the last stronghold of the Crusaders, which was not just a stone and walls, but a complex system of faith and war? Rhodes was more than just an island in the Aegean Sea. It was a sovereign state founded and ruled by the Knights of St. John, or Hospitallers. They settled here after the fall of Jerusalem and Acre, turning the island into an impregnable naval base that held back the Ottoman fleet for centuries. Geographically, Rhodes was a strategic key controlling the trade routes between East and West, and its presence in close proximity to the shores of Anatolia was a constant and unbearable reproach to the Ottoman sultans. The knights did not simply defend themselves. They were a formidable force in their own right, carrying out daring raids on Muslim ships, which made them pirates of Christianity in the eyes of the Ottoman Empire. The fortress of Rhodes was not a medieval castle, but an engineering marvel ahead of its time. Over the centuries, the knights, constantly expecting an attack, turned the city into a multi-level defense system designed specifically to withstand artillery. The walls were up to 12 meters thick, and the outer fortifications, called bastions, were designed to absorb the energy of cannonballs and allow flanking fire to be directed at attackers. Each of the 8 tongues, or national groups of the order, England, France, Germany, Aragon, Provence, Auvergne, Castile, and Italy, was responsible for its own section of the wall. This principle embodied the idea that the strength of a fortress lies not only in stone, but also in the unity and honor of each of its defenders. Above it all stood Grand Master Philip Villiers de l'Isle-Adam, a man of iron will and unyielding spirit. It was under his leadership that the final and most thorough preparations for the inevitable siege were made. He tirelessly reinforced the walls, stockpiled provisions and gunpowder, and, most importantly, kept an eye on the morale of his knights and citizens. De l'Isle-Adam understood perfectly well that defeat at Rhodes would mean not only the loss of the island, but the end of the order itself as an independent military and political force. He sent desperate messages to Christian monarchs, begging them to send reinforcements and aid, but all his appeals went unanswered. The confrontation between Rhodes and the Ottoman Empire was a personal matter for the new Sultan, Suleiman, who had just ascended the throne. He was young, ambitious, and determined not only to continue, but to surpass the conquests of his father, Selim Mermers. The presence of the Knights Hospitaller on his shores was an insult to his authority, and Suleiman decided to wipe this nest of vipers off the face of the earth, making it the first major symbol of his reign. So he began to assemble an unprecedented military fleet and army that would settle the issue of Rhodes once and for all. The Ottomans approached the siege with incredible seriousness and resources. Their army numbered more than 100,000 men, including the elite janissaries and the empire's best artillerymen, and their fleet consisted of hundreds of ships carrying men, siege weapons, and supplies. It was a veritable war machine, equipped with the latest technology, and its goal was to crush the knightly bastion at all costs. No one in Europe doubted that Rhodes was doomed. The only question was how long it could hold out under such pressure. The difference in strength was simply astronomical. According to the most conservative estimates, there were more than 14 Ottoman soldiers for every defender, not counting support personnel and sailors. It was a confrontation between a handful of professional warriors and an entire army, inspired and led by one of the greatest rulers in history. However, the knights had the advantage of the walls, and most importantly, the absolute determination to fight to the death. for they had nowhere to retreat. In the city itself, in addition to the knights, there were about 5,000 local militiamen, Greek inhabitants of the island. They too were preparing for defense, knowing that if the Ottomans won, they would face either death or slavery, but certainly not mercy. Their contribution to the defense, especially in repairing the walls damaged by fire, was as important as the exploits of the knights in armor. Thus, the siege of Rhodes became not just a battle for the island, but a test of strength for European ideals of honor and fortitude against the advancing imperial power of the East. It was the last chance for the Christian world to show that it was ready to fight for its outposts rather than simply watch them fall. History was ready to take another dramatic turn. There was only one hope left, a miracle or help that never came. Do you agree with this? Please tell us what you think about this. Every opinion is valuable. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out what happened next. I discovered this by accident. The story of this siege begins with the Ottoman Armada filling the entire visible sea, which was a sight both frightening and awe-inspiring. In June 1522, the vanguard appeared off the coast of Rhodes, followed shortly thereafter by the entire fleet under the command of Mustafa Pasha, who brought a huge army to the island. The knights watching this spectacle from the walls understood perfectly well that this was not just another skirmish, but a full-scale war of annihilation. At the same time, Suleiman the Magnificent himself led the land army through Anatolia to personally control the course of the siege and inspire his soldiers with his presence, demonstrating his determination. Work immediately began on setting up a siege camp, which was larger and better organized than any previous one. The Ottomans deployed thousands of workers to dig trenches, build earthen ramparts, and install their monstrous artillery, which was their main trump card at the time. Their cannons were capable of firing stone cannonballs of incredible size, which could destroy even the thickest medieval walls in a matter of days. The knights, in turn, were forced to engage in counter-battery warfare, trying to destroy the Ottoman cannons before they could cause irreparable damage. The bombardment began with stunning intensity, shaking the walls and the city itself. The Ottomans concentrated their fire on what they considered to be the weakest sections of the fortifications, especially the bastions defended by the English, Provençals, and Italians. Cannonballs flew day and night, turning stone facades into clouds of dust and rubble, and the main task of the defenders was to continuously repair the damage. Knights and Greek militiamen worked under constant fire, filling the breaches with sacks of earth, logs, and any other materials at hand, which required incredible courage and endurance. A constant nervous rhythm of war settled in the city, where trumpet signals warned not only of an attack, but also of the need to rush to the breach for repairs. The lives of the townspeople changed radically. They hid in basements, but at the same time actively participated in supplying and supporting the defense, becoming not just passive victims, but active participants in the resistance. Grandmaster de Lille Adam constantly walked around the walls, talking to soldiers and workers, and his calm presence, according to witnesses, lifted their spirits. The Ottomans paid particular attention to the Bastion of England, which was located in a strategically important area. It was here that they concentrated their most powerful artillery, turning this sector into hell on earth. After several weeks of continuous bombardment, the bastion wall was almost completely destroyed, which was the first serious breach in the defense of Rhodes. This created a huge gaping hole through which the Ottomans could launch an assault, and the knights had to erect an internal barricade to close this dangerous passage. At the same time, the knights used their naval power to try to disrupt the Ottoman supply lines. Although the Order's fleet was small compared to the Ottoman Armada, they made night raids, sank small ships, and burned warehouses to sow chaos in the enemy camp. These daring actions, while unable to change the course of the siege, kept up the morale of the defenders, showing that they were not trapped and still capable of striking back. Mustafa Pasha, seeing the effectiveness of his artillery, prepared for the first general assault, confident that the broken walls and exhausted defenders would not be able to withstand the onslaught of his janissaries. He underestimated the steadfastness of the knights and their determination to die for their bastion. Each destruction of the wall only strengthened their will to resist. For the Ottomans, this siege was becoming more than just a conquest of territory. It was a test of their military glory and a challenge to their sultan, and they could not afford defeat. The tension grew with each passing day, and it was clear that the decisive battle was approaching. Would the knights be able to hold their position when the first wave of Janissaries descended upon them? You will find the answer to this question in the next chapter. But you've definitely never heard about this unique secret. What happened in mid-September was a real test of strength, a moment when the fate of Rhodes hung in the balance. The first wave of the general assault, which the Ottomans had been preparing for weeks, turned into a culmination of tension, fear, and heroism. Turkish cannons methodically smashed the walls of the bastions, and Mustafa Pasha, confident that the city would soon fall, finally gave the order to attack. This was not a spontaneous onslaught, but a carefully calculated attack that covered several sections of the wall at once. His plan was simple: to stretch the knights' forces like a string and strike at the moment when they began to crack. The main blow fell on the Bastion of England, the very point that had already been reduced to ruins after continuous artillery fire. It seemed that this breach would be the tomb of the defenders. But the knights had a surprise in store for their enemy. In a few hours, they erected a powerful internal barricade of stones, earth, brick debris, and wooden beams behind the destroyed wall. It was a second line of defense, improvised but thought out to the smallest detail. When thousands of Ottoman soldiers rushed into the breach, they expected to see the battered remains of the walls. But instead they encountered desperate, almost superhuman resistance. The narrow passageway turned into a veritable cauldron. Knights and townspeople, armed not only with swords and spears, but also with pickaxes, crowbars, hammers, and even construction tools, fought off anyone who tried to break through. From the upper platforms, streams of boiling oil, liquefied resin, and burning lime were poured onto the attackers. Stones, logs, and barrels of sand rolled down, turning the breach into a deadly trap. That day became the bloodiest for the Ottoman army since the beginning of the siege. Mustafa Pasha, watching the battle from the rear, saw his own Janissaries, the elite of the army, fall one after another. Every meter they gained at such a cost immediately turned into a place of death for dozens of their comrades. Several times the Janissaries managed to reach the top of the barricade, but the knights and militiamen, led by the personal example of Grand Master Dalil Adam, threw them back with such fury as if they were defending not walls, but their own souls. An equally fierce battle unfolded on the Italian bastion. Here too, the Ottomans made a serious breach, hoping to repeat their success on the English front. However, the Italian knights, commanded by the fearless Conrad von Schallenberg, met them with such fury that the front ranks of the attackers were simply crushed back. After several hours of continuous slaughter, they not only held their defenses, but also made a daring sortie. They drove the Ottomans out of their trenches, destroyed several artillery crews, and forced the enemy to retreat. This episode forced the Turkish commanders to reconsider their confidence in their invincibility. The failure of the first assault was a heavy blow to the morale of the Ottoman army. Mustafa Pasha lost thousands of his best fighters, including elite Janissaries, and did not advance a single step. When Suleiman was informed of the failure, his anger was so great that Mustafa Pasha was removed from command in the midst of the siege, an event almost unheard of in the Ottoman Empire. He was replaced by the experienced Ahmed Pasha, a man capable of acting calmly and decisively where others lost their heads. In Rhodes itself, despite huge losses, fatigue, and the constant fear of another assault, there was a sense of solemn jubilation. The defenders felt that they were capable of withstanding the enormous Ottoman machine. They proved to themselves and to the entire Christian world that their walls were not just stone, but a symbol of fortitude, honor, and will. The knights worked without sleep or rest, instantly reinforcing damaged sections, filling gaps with stone bags, earth, and wooden blocks. It seemed as if the city itself had come to life and was fighting alongside them. The victory was short-lived, but its psychological effect was enormous. The knights showed that the breach was not the end, but only the beginning of the real battle. Their tactics, based on discipline, courage, and the ability to fight in close combat, proved to be much more effective than the mindless onslaught of a numerically superior army. For the Ottomans, it was a painful reminder that cannons and tens of thousands of soldiers alone were not enough to break the spirit of those who were ready to give their lives for their fortress. This was only the first, but far from the last, great assault on Rhodes. If you were impressed by the incredible resilience of the knights, don't forget to like this video. And we will definitely continue our journey into the most dramatic and little-known episodes of the Siege of Rhodes. What you are about to learn will change your perception of medieval warfare. After the failure of the frontal assault, the Ottomans resorted to a tactic that was no less destructive: mine warfare. This was not just a simple tunneling under the walls, but an entire underground campaign requiring engineering precision, patience, and incredible courage, where sappers became as important figures as artillerymen. Their goal was simple but deadly: to place a powerful charge of gunpowder under key bastions and blow them up from the inside to create new, unprotected breaches for attack. The knights were well aware of this threat and did not sit idly by. They deployed their own network of counterminers, led by Italian engineer Gabriele Tadini da Martinengo, one of the few military specialists who responded to the call for help. The war moved into the darkness of the underground, into narrow, stuffy tunnels where two enemies could come face to face in absolute silence, listening for the sound of a pickaxe or shovel. This was a fight to the death, often ending in merciless hand-to-hand combat in complete darkness. The counterminers' task was to detect enemy tunnels before the Ottomans could lay their charges. They used simple but effective methods: scattering dry peas on the floor to catch the slightest vibration and keeping sandbags in the tunnels to absorb sound. A clash in a tunnel was a terrible event that often led to the collapse of the arches and the burial of both sides. Sometimes the knights deliberately set fire to the powder gases in the Ottoman tunnels to cause an explosion and suffocate the enemy sappers. The most dramatic underground battle took place under the Castile Bastion and the Germany Bastion, which the Ottomans had chosen as their main targets. For several weeks, both sides dug tunnels, racing each other and trying to trap the enemy. The Ottomans managed to detonate several charges, causing local damage. But the knights, thanks to Tadini's work, managed to detonate dozens of Ottoman mines, preventing a catastrophe. The engineering ingenuity of the knights and their allies saved the fortress from complete destruction. Success in the underground war was another factor that demoralized the Ottoman soldiers. They saw that the knights were not only repelling attacks from above, but were also ready to fight them in the most inhuman conditions, even underground. Each exploded mine was a small but important victory that delayed the inevitable end and gave the defenders precious time. Ahmed Pasha was forced to reconsider his tactics again, as the mine warfare was not as effective as he had hoped. This period of the siege showed that war was no longer just a battle of walls and cannons. It had become a battle of wits, where the winner was the one who could be more cunning, patient, and inventive. And the Knights of Rhodes proved that they were masters of both above-ground and underground warfare. Despite all their efforts, the Ottomans continued to destroy the walls step by step. What other fortifications were completely destroyed by the end of autumn? Autumn in Rhodes brought not only the first cold winds and heavy leaden clouds, but also a new, much darker phase of the siege, which threatened to wear down the defenders faster than any assault. The rains turned the trenches into a sticky swamp, the branches bent under the gusts of wind, and the nights grew longer, all of which created a sense of impending hopelessness. However, the worst was not in the sky, but on the ground. The Ottoman artillery, having failed to achieve a quick and effective breakthrough, simply increased the intensity of the shelling. Now the shells fell on the walls almost without interruption, from morning until late at night, methodically eroding the stone that had recently been considered impregnable. Each day brought new destruction. What had been a strong wall or a system of battlements yesterday was now turning into smoking rubble today. Stone blocks split as if they were made of clay. Entire sections of retaining walls disappeared under the blows of Ottoman bombardments. With each new blow, the defenders felt more and more acutely how quickly their resources were dwindling. Their supplies of lime, wood, food, even clean water, and the messages from Europe, on which the inhabitants of Rhodes and the Knights had placed so much hope, never arrived. Prayers for help dissolved in the restless sound of the waves at the city's piers, and hope, as fragile as the walls themselves, grew weaker and weaker. The most devastating blow was the complete destruction of the Provence Bastion, the pride of Rhodes' defensive system and one of its most fortified strongholds. Ottoman artillery literally wiped this bastion off the face of the earth. The defenders tried to erect temporary barriers, fill the breaches with stones and earth, but after another merciless bombardment, it became clear that it was impossible to hold this line. The knights were forced to retreat slowly and painfully, falling back to pre-prepared internal positions. This retreat was a heavy psychological blow. The outer perimeter was lost, and now the Ottomans had virtually unobstructed access to the residential quarters. This was not just a military maneuver, it was an ominous signal. The fortress was closing in like a noose. Grand Master Dalil Adam was faced with a terrible choice that could cost the city. He understood that the longer the siege lasted, the greater the hope for European crowns, but the fewer resources the knights would have left. He had to keep down the decline in morale caused by constant cannon fire, cold nights, and rumors that Western monarchs were busy with their own conflicts. To prevent possible panic, the master ordered the destruction of any food and wine supplies remaining outside the defensive lines. Anything that could help the enemy had to be burned. At the same time, he announced that talk of surrender would be punished as treason, severely and mercilessly. But even under this hellish pressure, the knights continued to carry out daring and incredibly courageous raids. Night raids became a salvation for both the fortress and its morale. Under cover of darkness, small detachments made their way into the Ottoman trenches, destroyed artillery crews, set fire to supply depots, and tried to carry away everything that could be useful in the city. Tools, weapons, provisions, even individual artillery barrels, if they could be quickly hooked up. These sorties were deadly dangerous. Many did not return, but their effect was enormous. They showed the Ottomans that the defenders of Rhodes were not passive victims of the siege, but an active, deadly force to be reckoned with every day. The Ottoman army also suffered terrible losses. Rain and cold undermined the foundations of their huge military machine. Disease spread in the overcrowded camps, and the constant counterattacks by the knights turned life into a never-ending nightmare. Irritation and discontent grew. To maintain discipline, Suleiman was forced to resort to cruel measures. Several officers suspected of indecision and cowardice were executed in front of the soldiers. This bloody warning made it clear there would be no retreat, even if tens of thousands of lives had to be sacrificed for victory. By the end of November, most of Rhodes's outer fortifications were in ruins. The defenders now clung to the inner bastions, barricades, and hastily constructed defensive lines, created from whatever could be used: stones, debris from houses, and planks from dismantled sheds. The city itself inside the fortress looked like it had been hit by an earthquake. The streets were littered with rubble, the roofs were caved in, and the walls of the houses were covered with soot and cracks. But despite this, the spirit of the knights remained surprisingly strong, sustained by faith, honor, and the desperate hope that help would still come. The Ottoman commanders gradually began to realize that direct assaults with their colossal losses were a dead end. They had to act more cunningly. Thus began a new insidious phase of the siege. The Turks began to bribe individual residents, trying to obtain information about weak spots. They sent spies disguised as Christians into the city slums. They spread rumors of imminent surrender, hoping to shake the resolve of women, children, and the elderly. They used every trick and every means possible to destroy the unity of the defenders. And it was here, on the cold November nights, amid the roar of cannons and the howling wind, that the fate of Rhodes began to be decided not only by swords and cannons, but also by the ability to withstand psychological pressure. Not to flinch in the face of cunning, and not to lose faith when everything around them was collapsing. What if I showed you a time machine that would take us back to the moment when the fate of Rhodes was decided not by cannonballs, but by betrayal? At the height of the siege, when the fortress was holding on by its last breath, an event occurred that became known as the Great Betrayal. It was not a betrayal within the order, but a complete and cynical disregard for duty on the part of the European monarchs, whose help the knights had so desperately counted on. Throughout the siege, Grand Master Dalil Adam sent pleading letters to Charles the Magnificent, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, as well as to other European kings. He described the horrors of the siege and the heroic resistance, and begged for ships with reinforcements and supplies to be sent. However, these letters were either ignored or met with polite but empty promises, as European rulers were too busy with their own intrigues and wars. At this critical moment, when unity was needed, the Christian world was divided. The greatest responsibility lay with Charles V, who was the most powerful monarch in Europe at the time. He could have sent a fleet, which would undoubtedly have changed the course of the siege and possibly forced Suleiman to retreat, but he preferred to focus on his conflicts with France and the Protestant princes. This inaction was a death sentence for Rhodes and a bitter lesson for the knights that they would have to face their fate alone. However, not all of Europe remained inactive. In December, when the situation was already critical, a small reinforcement force of 6 ships sent by the Pope and the Viceroy of Sicily broke through to the harbor of Rhodes. These ships carried only a few hundred soldiers and a small supply of provisions, but their arrival was an incredible morale boost for the exhausted defenders. It was not a miracle, but at least a symbolic confirmation that they had not been completely forgotten. Sultan Suleiman, seeing that the fortress had not been broken even after 5 months of siege, and knowing that his army was also suffering heavy losses, decided to change tactics. He realized that taking Rhodes by storm would cost him more than he was willing to pay, and he offered the knights honorable terms of surrender. This was an unprecedented move that contradicted all the rules of Ottoman warfare, but it showed how much Suleiman valued his army. Dalil Adam, despite his despair, refused, declaring that the knights would fight to the end, which forced Suleiman to temporarily resume the bombardment. However, after a small but bloody assault, which was again repelled, Suleiman repeated his offer, which was now more attractive and included the preservation of the lives of all defenders and civilians. Why did Suleiman, as the victor, offer such incredibly generous terms to the defeated? The Ottomans launched their last major assault in mid-December, concentrating all their forces on the last remaining bastions. This time, the attack was carried out with particular ferocity because Suleiman himself was near the line of fire and personally observed the developments. His presence increased the pressure on the commanders as the Sultan demanded immediate and decisive success, unwilling to endure the prolonged siege any longer. The Ottoman commanders brought in fresh troops, regrouped their artillery, and threw their best janissaries into battle, confident that they would now finally break the resistance of the knights. The enemy managed to break through the ruined bastion of Castile, turning it into a burning battlefield. A fierce hand-to-hand battle began in the city, which became the most terrible and cruel in the entire months-long siege. The knights fought with desperate courage, knowing that this moment could be their last. They defended not only the fortifications, but also the city itself, turning every alley, every ruined house, and even staircases into improvised barricades. The streets of Rhodes turned into narrow traps, where narrow passages gave the defenders an advantage, and the Ottomans were forced to advance step by step under the blows of swords and crossbow bolts. During these difficult hours, all the inhabitants joined in the defense of the city. Women brought water and sand to extinguish the fires, rolled boulders off the roofs, and teenagers carried weapons and helped hold back the onslaught. The townspeople and knights stood side by side, and many paid for it with their lives. Many Ottoman soldiers died that day, and although they managed to gain a foothold in several areas, they were unable to break through the defenses completely. The city held out, but was exhausted to the limit. After this bloody but fruitless assault, it became clear that further fighting would only lead to the complete destruction of both sides. Dalil Adam saw that his men's strength was running out, and the walls, like the food supplies, continued to crumble. He began to understand that the time had come to make a difficult and perhaps inevitable decision. The master convened a council of war, which was attended by all the key commanders of the order. An oppressive silence reigned at this council. The knights no longer hoped for a miracle because they saw with their own eyes how rapidly the gunpowder was running out and how the food stores were emptying. The losses among their people were enormous, and every day brought new casualties. But most importantly, the civilian population could no longer withstand such stress. That is why the knights voted almost unanimously to start negotiations. Now, their main goal was not to hold the fortress, but to save the lives of the inhabitants of Rhodes and preserve the honor of the order. The negotiations were long and tense. The Ottomans and the knights exchanged envoys for many hours, sometimes even days, trying to find a compromise between pride and reality. However, Suleiman, Tired of the protracted siege and seeing the enormous losses his army was suffering, showed a softness surprising for a great conqueror. He offered the knights unprecedentedly generous terms, which he had never before offered to any defeated enemy. He allowed the order to leave the island with their banners, personal weapons, and even some of their artillery, expressing his respect for the courage of the defenders. The Sultan guaranteed the Greek inhabitants of Rhodes freedom of religion and exemption from taxes for several years to come. These unusually generous promises astonished even the knights themselves, who were accustomed to seeing Turkish rulers as ruthless conquerors. Suleiman's main condition was that the order must leave the island within 12 days. This gave the knights time to prepare their ships, gather the wounded, and pack their archives, jewels, and relics, but it did not allow them to delay their departure. Dalila Adam understood that this was his only chance not only to save his people, but also to preserve the dignity of the entire order, which had withstood a siege that less resilient armies would not have endured for even a month. He agreed to the Sultan's terms, not wanting to shed any more blood of the island's inhabitants, whom the knights had defended for more than 2 centuries. And so, on the first day of the new year, 1523, the Knights of St. John left Rhodes. Their ships slowly left the harbor, loaded with wounded people, sacred relics, and banners that bore the memory of past victories. Thus ended their 213-year reign on the island, which had become a legend and a symbol of their unyielding will. The scene of the knights leaving Rhodes became one of the most dramatic and respectable in the history of warfare. Despite their defeat, they left the island with their banners flying high, as victors rather than vanquished, which was a direct result of Suleiman's generosity. This moment became the culmination of a story in which knightly honor was appreciated even by the enemy. Grand Master Dalil Adam walked for the last time along the walls he had so valiantly defended. He supervised the embarkation of the surviving knights, soldiers, and about 4,000 Greek inhabitants who had decided to leave with the order, preferring exile to life under Ottoman rule. On the 30 ships that had been assembled, they carried not only their weapons, but also the sacred relics and archives of the order, which were priceless. There was a mixed feeling in the Ottoman camp. The soldiers rejoiced in their victory, but at the same time looked with undisguised respect at the handful of departing people who had kept their huge army under siege for 7 months. Suleiman the Magnificent, wishing to show his respect for the courage of Dalil Adam, even sent him his personal horse as a gift and guaranteed his safety during their sea crossing. This act went down in history as one of the examples of the great Sultan's nobility. For the knights, it was a difficult and bitter exile. They lost their homeland and their home, but retained their honor and organization. They took with them not just people, but the very spirit of the order, which was not broken. They faced the difficult task of finding a new place where they could continue their existence and mission. The departure of the knights opened a new chapter in the history of the Mediterranean. The Ottomans gained complete control of the Aegean Sea, and their fleet gained a base from which they could freely threaten Italy and southern Europe. Now nothing stood in the way of their unstoppable expansion to the west. After leaving Rhodes, the Knights of St. John began a period of long wanderings that lasted 7 years. It was a time of uncertainty and despair, when the order, deprived of its territory, resembled a wandering fleet seeking refuge in Christian Europe, which had done so little to save it. They settled temporarily first in Crete, then in Messina, and then in Viterbo, Italy, constantly seeking protection and assistance. Grand Master Dalil Adam did not give up. He tirelessly negotiated with European monarchs, trying to convince them that the order was still an important force for defending Europe from the Ottoman threat. He argued that the knights had proven their worth in battle and that their loss would be irreplaceable. His persistence, coupled with respect for their defense, eventually paid off. In 1530, after lengthy negotiations, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Sicily, offered the order 2 islands, Malta and Gozo, as well as the small North African outpost of Tripoli. This offer was made on the condition that the knights send him 1 Maltese falcon annually as a symbolic tribute. Thus, the Order of St. John found its new home, and from that moment on, they became known as the Knights of Malta. Malta was a completely different place from Rhodes. It was a barren, rocky island that did not have such powerful fortifications. But the knights immediately set to work, using the experience they had gained in defending Rhodes. They began to build new, modern forts and bastions, that were designed to withstand artillery, realizing that a clash with the Ottomans was inevitable. The new life in Malta marked the rebirth of the order. They restored their power, fleet, and political influence, becoming an even more formidable force in the Mediterranean. They did not forget their defeat at Rhodes, and this became the catalyst for their incredible determination to create an even more impregnable fortress that could withstand any onslaught. The Siege of Rhodes in 1522 has enormous historical significance that extends far beyond the island itself and even the Mediterranean. This event was not only one of the great sieges of the era, but also a true turning point in the development of military engineering, the course of European diplomacy, and further Ottoman expansion. In essence, Rhodes became the stage for the last great act of crusading ideology, a drama in which defeat sounded like a special form of victory of the spirit. First, the siege clearly demonstrated the absolute superiority of Ottoman artillery and engineering technology in the 16th century. The Ottomans showed the world that the powerful, high, traditional stone walls, which until recently had seemed impregnable, were no longer capable of withstanding the blows of new heavy artillery. Months of methodical bombardment, the use of mine tunnels, grenades, engineering towers, and complex siege lines convincingly proved to the entire European military and political class that the old principles of fortification were hopelessly outdated. This lesson proved so convincing that in the following decades, Europe began to hastily rebuild its castles and fortresses, switching to a new bastion type of defense. Low, thick earthen walls capable of absorbing and dissipating the energy of artillery shells. Rhodes became a symbol of the end of the medieval fortress and the birth of a new century of warfare. Secondly, the siege became a tragic but telling symbol of the disunity of Christian Europe. The inaction of Charles V, the Italian states and other monarchs preoccupied with their own conflicts, and the procrastination of the papacy all showed that the religious solidarity that had once united the continent against the infidels had given way to political ambitions, dynastic strife, and local interests. For contemporaries, this was an alarming sign. The Ottoman Empire could freely continue its expansion without fear of decisive and coordinated resistance. The Siege of Rhodes was a harbinger of a new Europe, where the concept of a crusade had finally lost its meaning. Thirdly, this was a turning point in the history of the Order of St. John itself. Having lost Rhodes, their abode, their ancient walls, and 213 years of labor, the Knights did not lose the most important thing: their autonomy, honor, and fighting power. Their departure from the island, on terms that allowed them to keep their weapons, banners, and even some of their artillery, was an act of rare historical uniqueness. The defeated left as warriors, not as prisoners. The expulsion was a difficult but necessary step for them, leading the order to a new home, Malta. There, several decades later, in 1565, they took up the challenge of a second great siege, where, now as Maltese knights, they inflicted one of the heaviest defeats of Suleiman's long reign. Thus, the defeat at Rhodes became a kind of purification and training for a future, legendary victory. Finally, the steadfastness of the 7,000 defenders who resisted an army several times their size became a legend that transcended eras and cultures. This confrontation became a symbol that even in the most hopeless circumstances, courage, faith, technical ingenuity, and an unwavering sense of duty can force the most powerful army in the world to pay a huge price for victory. Rhodes fell, but the spirit of its defenders rose higher than the walls destroyed by Ottoman cannons. We see that the Siege of Rhodes was not just a battle, but an epic drama in which the Knights of the Order of St. John demonstrated incredible fortitude and honor in the face of overwhelming superiority. Their defeat became a victory of their spirit, for even the great Suleiman the Magnificent was forced to acknowledge their courage and offer terms that preserved their lives in the order itself. This story will forever remain in the annals as a vivid example of how human will can resist force, even when there is no hope of victory. Which part of this story impressed you the most? The heroism of Dalil Adam, the engineering warfare of Tadini, or the nobility of Suleiman? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the great battles of the past.